So our theme for the month of April is the physiology of spirituality. And today's topic, as Gail just mentioned, is building the new. And here's the thing. Ask yourself what's new in your consciousness or unfolding in your consciousness that is new for you since the 8th of April when we started this series, this subject, the physiology of spirituality. Have you experienced any new or heightened feelings in your mental, your physical, your emotional, or your spiritual awareness? Have you perhaps begun reading books from authors new to you, or ones you already know and have decided to reread or read further offerings from them? Have you realized a new awareness of those around you and how they live their lives? Has the concept that physiology and spirituality are really one? Has that been awakened or heightened in you? Have you considered the gifts that we receive from so many way showers as they share freely with their own ahas, as well as the ones that they have observed in their clients, their patients, their workers, their families, their peers? It's probably been fairly obvious this month that I am intrigued by the updating and the expansion of ancient wisdom with each unfolding generation. And that research, that information, those discoveries that once were encapsulated by specific groups are now universally available to anyone and all who simply take the time to find and to read or listen or observe them. So here's something that has become somewhat of a buzzword in today's vocabulary: the matrix. Have you heard that expression, those words, the matrix? Well, the word matrix is defined as an environmental or material in which something develops. A surrounding medium or structure, a mold in which something is cast or shaped. My, that has a familiar ring to some of us, doesn't it? My students in particular taking classes know what that ring is, don't you? And it's a word, matrix, which has been capitalized on in a variety of different uses and meanings. However, back in 1944, a man by the name of Max Planck, who was known as the father of quantum theory, shocked the world by saying that the matrix is where the birth of stars, the birth of DNA of life, and the birth of everything in between originates. Recent discoveries reveal dramatic evidence that Planck's matrix, the divine matrix as he called it, is real. So in addition to fiction novels and movies and a score of other uses, a book written by Greg Braden in 2007, titled The Divine Matrix, explored the concept of that divine matrix from the viewpoint of a spiritual seeker. A year later, his next book, titled The Spontaneous Healing of Belief, hit the bestseller list as well. And I have a copy of Spontaneous Healing that I brought with me this morning. It looks like this. I want to share some of his comments from that book. So I'm quoting. A growing body of scientific evidence suggests that our universe works like a consciousness computer. Isn't that a cool phrase? Consciousness computer. Rather than the number codes of typical software, though, our consciousness computer uses a language that we all have, yet are only beginning to understand. Life's reality code is based in the language of human emotion and focused belief. Knowing that our belief is our reality maker, the way we think about ourselves and our world is now more important than ever. For us, these are still his words, for us to change the beliefs that have led to war, disease, failed careers, and relationships of our past, we need a reason to see things differently. Our ancestors used miracles to change what they believed. Today, he says, we use science. The spontaneous healing of belief offers us both. The miracles that open the door to a powerful new way of seeing the world, and the science that tells us why the miracles are possible, revealing why we are not limited by the laws of physics and biology as we now know them. Because what we knew a century ago or 10 centuries ago as not being possible in many instances is commonplace now. So we have nowhere to go but onward and upward. In the 21st century, Braden and of course Bruce Lipton, who I talk about frequently, as well as many others, are speaking the language of the millennials. Well, have you ever asked yourself, what on earth is a millennial? Here's the answer. According to the Pew Research Center, millennials were born between the years of 1981 and 1996. Those born after that time are considered post-millennials. How fast our society moves these days. So just a bit of trivia for your consideration. But the point is, these scientists, these spiritual way-showers, are speaking in a language understandable, acceptable to new generations. And so can we. I still have those 17 books I referred to in my first talk this month, stacked on the table surrounding my computer. There's such a wealth of information in their studies, in their research, in the examples that they make available to us. In addition to the magnificent work of those in the 20th century, clear back in the 20th century, which I might remind you is 18 years ago, even back into the 19th century. And we know some of that material that is so precious to us, from Emerson, from Troward, from Emma Curtis Hopkins, from Oliver Wendell Holmes. So many juicy things for us to think about. And on back into antiquity, what's come forward from Meister Eckhart back in the 1300s. Such incredible information. Is it overwhelming? Only when we allow it to be. Because in truth, there are such parallels running through all of this. You know, when I talk about the physical laws of the universe and the spiritual laws of the universe, and they operate in parallel because they operate out of the same base. So truths that come forward from the past, clothed in different words, yet describing the same potentials, the same outcomes, the same demonstrations. For me, this is a part of what keeps me curious. It keeps me searching and expanding my thinking. So I have more than one set of words to answer a question, to explain what Braden means when he says a miracle. That a miracle is simply a remarkable event. There's no booga booga behind it. It's a remarkable event. It's universally possible. What isn't? And that's backed not only by centuries of demonstrations in real life, but also by the scientific knowledge that supports them. You know what? That scientific knowledge always supported them. We just didn't know it. And now we know it. And so we are seeing this very alignment that I talk about, the centering that I talk about in the individual, also becoming more apparent in the macrocosm. So let me reiterate that quote from Greg Braden for us to think about, because this is so important. And he slips it in there so gently and so easily that it could easily be overlooked. So let me reiterate. For us to change the beliefs that have led to war, disease, and the failed careers and relationships of our past, we need a reason to see things differently. Our ancestors used miracles to change what they believed. Today we use science. The spontaneous healing of belief offers us both the miracles, those remarkable events that open the door to a powerful new way of seeing life and the world, and the science that tells us why that's possible, how that's possible, revealing why we are not limited by the laws of physics and biology as we have known them in the past. So I would be missing the opportunity of a lifetime to put the icing on the cake, metaphorically speaking, should I end this series of talks without adding the 40-plus books to the stacks of my computer, around my computer, because those 40-plus books that I talked about earlier were not in that pile. And those are the works of Ernest Holmes. The brilliance of his understanding and demonstrations of how this all works. Occasionally somebody says to me that they are challenged by, when they read Holmes' books, because of the language. I remember being that way once too. Yet how could he have written words that either didn't even exist in the language when those books were written, or had very different usage than they do today? Does that negate his works? Of course not. So I'm going to use some material from his body of language, The Science of the Mind, for the remainder of this talk. I've spared you and me the burden of bringing those 40-plus books. However, many of you already have a number of them in your own personal libraries, and we study them in our classes. We often gather in round-table discussions for greater understanding. In his very first publication, called The Science of Mind, he begins by talking about the nature of being, with definitions of mind, soul, which he calls the creative medium, soul, and body. So, mind, soul, or creative medium, and body. And he defines spirit, its nature, its action, and its loving personalness. There is an explanation in that book of how we, as creative expressions of God or spirit or universal energy, reenact its nature, our oneness in it. We are made out of the same stuff that everything else in the universe is made of. just different combinations. How original is that thinking? To come up with as many different displays of the same basic elements that result ultimately in the spiritual being having a human experience, and yet every one of them is individualistically different than every other. And yet our functions are the same. It's just so cool. In his first publication, he also talks about spiritual mind healing. In fact, he talks about it for 197 pages. Now, that's a big book. It's got a lot of pages in it, but 197 pages on mental healing. And in that, he talks about the recognition of the power and the thought and the purpose back of mind healing. Now, when he talks about this, that's not capital M. That's little m, which is talking about the mind within each of us. And you've heard me say this so many times, but I can never say it too many times. And that is that this marvelous thing we call the brain, which resides here in the top part of your body, is a part of your brain, but not all of it. It has a lot of wonderful functions that have to do with the whole rest of the body, which is also part of your mind. Because every cell in your body has intelligence. And the intelligence of each cell is connected to the organ or the system that it is within. And each one of those organs or those systems are connected with all the others in the most magnificent display. Somebody told me one time that in order to build a computer as complex as the function of the human body would take space the size of Texas. And I've never heard that disputed. That there is such magnificence in the human, the spiritual being having the human experience in our bodies because of this incredible intelligence. To duplicate it would take who knows how many finite lifetimes. So there is a power behind, within, and around each one of us that is represented by not only the individual cell, but the composite of cells in each one of us expressing as a human. Holmes concludes those two sections in the text with, what else do you suppose? A spiritual mind treatment, an affirmative prayer. Because as we all know, that's at the very heart of this philosophy. Our individual alignment with, what did Planks and Braden call it? Oh, I remember, the matrix. Our alignment with the matrix. You see, they're talking about the same thing we're talking about. Just a bit more modern word, although that word was around, but it was never used like it was used, starting with Planks and moving on into Braden and all of the other things that you have seen that represented in some form of accuracy or another. So our individual alignment with a surrounding medium or structure, a mold in which something is cast or shaped, which is the description of the matrix, is also the description of the creative process that shows up in that ring in Science of Mind that talks about spirit, soul, or the creative medium, and body. Same stuff, said differently. Holmes called it God. Some call it our source of being, spirit, divine intelligence. We had a minister over on Oahu one time who used to call it Big Sweetie. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's your source of being. And your connection with it, a positive one. So the key here is surrounding. everything equally present all the time, that we are immersed in it, we're surrounded by it, and we are it. Holmes' stream of consciousness then goes on to present a section in the text on the invisible whole, which is within which all of its parts, the invisible whole, or the indivisible whole, which means we're all in this together. We are all a part of this magnificent wholeness unfolding all the time. Even when you think you know that you are separated from it, you are still within it. And then in the very last section, simply titled Meditations, beginning on page 553, as I told you, it's a big book. Meditations they are actually a series of short readings on a variety of challenges that we encounter on our own roadway of life. It's kind of like having your own mastermind. Remember the mastermind groups that used to be so popular? I don't know whether they're still around or not, but for a while they were very popular, mastermind groups. Or the board of directors, as Napoleon Hill called his a number of years ago. And his board of directors was made up of people who not necessarily were still walking the earth, but whose minds, whose ideas, whose forward-looking intelligence made a real difference. And he had them on his board of directors. And when he called a meeting of his board of directors, he had a conversation with each one of them. He asked questions. He listened for feedback. And he was perfectly sane when he was doing this. But it was the idea of, when you go into mind, and when you do a spiritual mind treatment, you expect an answer back. Whose voice do you hear that answer? Your own. Because what you're looking at, or for, you're looking with. So these readings from Holmes, these, quote, meditations, may not encompass all of the challenges that we face in today's world, the world of 2018, but they give structure to how we can construct our spiritual process or practice in any setting. And they provide hints on how to establish and express your own spiritual mind treatments. It's not that you read somebody else's and just say it rote, but rather that you construct something that is unique to your intention, unique to your expectation, unique to your situation. And the response is exactly that. So the 40 plus books that follow the publication of the Science of Mind text are a variety of ways to express those same basic concepts. Some are very short. Many of them are very easy to read. Some are examples of the success of this practice. Some are collaborations with other authors. All of them honor our truth of being through spiritual practice. In my edition, this particular one that I have, there is a foreword by Dr. Jean Houston, and it offers this. Dr. Jean says, there are many cultures, this is a book for the ages. It contains the distilled wisdom of many eras, many cultures, and one great soul. To read it is to be charged in the distillation of change, to enter into partnership with God, to relearn the laws of co-creation. And Houston goes on to say, if I were to state the essence of the teaching of the science of mind, it would be that the highest God and the innermost God is the one God. The core of each human being is the original creative genius of the universe. Do you ever think of yourself like that? You are, at core, the original creative genius of the universe. She finishes by saying, consciously or unconsciously, we direct the flow of universal mind into form. These are the times. We are the people. This is the book that can help us do that. Jean Houston herself has written over 30 books on the human potential, including her latest one called The Wizard of Us. She's an internationally known speaker, ceaseless in her message of human potential. So today I've given you 4 more examples of the shoulders on which we stand in our journeys to higher consciousness, an incredible mix of ancient and present-day wisdom. Each of us is a player in the building of the new in our own individual way. Yet who we are and what we do contributes to the whole in some way, seen and unseen, sometimes known and other times yet to be revealed. So, next week, on May 6th, we will do a question and answer discussion service which will not be recorded. And you are invited to participate with questions and or by listening. And if you have treasures of your own to share, like books, CDs, DVDs, webinars, etc., let us know about them. You need not bring them. You may if you wish, but you don't need to. But perhaps bring a list of some of the things that you have found particularly inspiring or useful that others might be interested in. Just like all these contributors that I've talked about this month, you too can be a source of knowledge and potential for the rest of us. And so it is. Thank you.